So let's share this thing.
Okay. Let's share. Um. No. Where's the link? Where's the link? I think it's the same thing that I'm saying all the time. What is the link? What is the link?
On the page.
Shoot. Um.
There's
Here.
a lot of people concerned that because they're teaching or stuff like this, but we will leave the Tap Talk online for a bit so that people can recap after the classes.
Right.
Let me see. Are we live?
I'm confused about sounds.
That's good.
No. Mm. Share the link. Share the link.
You found it?
I'm on it. Now. Convertir en la... ¿Cómo que en mi historia? No. ¿Qué me hablas?
I didn't turn on subtitles, Estefanía, so you have to keep to English.
Say it again.
I didn't.
Oh, subtitles. We need to do that. Sorry.
Okay, good. Yes, I see people are coming in. That's great. People are finding the link now. Perfect.
I want to get in.
Oh, subtitles.
Oh, shoot. No.
Awesome.
Hey.
Good.
I see Emilia and I see Anna.
Yeah, feel free.
Hello.
Yep. For the people who's coming in, say hi and
they can say hi.
Yeah.
That's a talk. Then we need to talk. Then talk.
Yes.
Like if there's like Spanish people, like they can send me the questions to me and I can translate it to. Then use it. We'll say it later.
Likewise in Norwegian, if anybody, doesn't matter what language you. We'll figure it out somehow.
Yes. Heyo! He hi ho! Wow! 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 Wait. That's great. Sareta.
Reading all the highs. Hey, ho, 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 ha.
That's great. Oh, you're fine. We're fine. We're fine. You have tea? If I have tea, I'm fine.
So
don't laugh.
1 minute exactly. So tell your people that we're live now and we start.
Sweet.
Verónica. Yeah. Oli. Hola, Sareta.
Great.
Yeah.
People ready. Awesome.
I want to bounce. I want to. That's great. Like that's confusing, but I have like the here and but it's working. I'm fine.
So long as it's working, I'm like.
But I can be like, But...
Yeah, great.
Tea.
People are finding the link and coming in. We have people.
So good to see you. Yeah, I told you.
So, should we start then? Are people ready?
Why not?
Sure. I'm down.
Let's go. Sorry, maybe I need to change the chair or something.
Well, Estefanía.
No, I'll try. I'll try my best.
Okay, you good? You good?
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. So we are very lucky to have with us Andrew Nemr today, and he has some topics about what we have discussed the last 2 times, which we think is very exciting, and it's an honor that you want to engage in our talks. Maybe you want to tell a bit about yourself.
Oh, okay. Where do you want me to start? I like.
Let's.
Where do you live?
Let's start.
The answer than most people think.
But there's many people like beginner students, intermediate, that maybe they don't know your path on your projects and your journey. Then maybe we can start there.
Yeah, I could give a quick overview. So I started tap dancing when I was 3.5 years old in a small dance studio in Alexandria, Virginia, Chris Collins Dance Studio. Chris Collins is still alive. He still has his dance studio, and he still likes to post pictures of me from recital days on Facebook. So if you want to have a laugh, you can find those. It's great.
I saw them.
Yeah, people say like I changed so much, but my eyes stayed the same. Like everything else about me, completely different. So yeah, so that was my beginning. I'm an only child, so my folks were like, "We think you should do something with other kids," and that was the option. When I was 9, I saw the movie Tap with Sammy Davis Jr. and Gregory Hines and a very young Savion Glover, and all the old cats in the challenge scene in that movie. And that's the moment that I remember falling in love with tap dancing. Like that was before then. It was something fun. Like I wanted to be good at it. It was like a special pursuit, but it wasn't something that I knew was going to be a part of my life forever. Um, and when I was 9, I was like, that's the thing. So I left the movie. I started sharing this with my parents. I'm like, I'm gonna become a tap dancer. I want to meet Gregory Hines, like all the things, and they were really supportive. So we started looking for opportunities to do this thing that at the time was called rhythm tap. And so we found the National Tap Ensemble was auditioning. It was a small youth ensemble and a professional ensemble, but I auditioned for the youth ensemble run by a guy named Chris Baker, who had been on the West Coast for a very long time. He said he had studied with Honey Coles and he moved to DC and then started this company. Chloe Arnold was in the company at the same time. So this is like early 90s. And within a year of being in the company, Chris handed me this paper that said, workshops, Gregory Hines, New York City, Savion Glover 2, Woodpeckers, New York. So it was the studio that the American Tap Dance Foundation was running at the time. And I grabbed the piece of paper. I went to my parents. I was like, can we do this? And they did the thing that parents do where they talk to each other, but they don't say any words. And they said yes. And I did a backflip and I didn't do a backflip. I can't do a backflip, but I was really excited. And the next thing I know, we're in a car driving to New York City, and I'm meeting Gregory and I'm meeting Savion. And so within a year of watching the film, the movie Tap, I met Gregory, I met Savion. Savion started doing residencies in the DC area. I was a part of those. They lasted for about 3 years. Out of that residency came a company called Real Tap Skills, which was myself, Joseph Webb, Bakari Wilder, and Vincent Bingham. And we did a couple things here and there, including Honey Cole's memorial tribute at the Apollo Theater, and a show. I think the show was called "Doing It in the Park." It was like a tap dance concert at the Delacorte Theater in New York City, which was the test show for Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk. It's kind of the show that, as far as my understanding was, the test for George C. Wolfe, who produced and directed Noise Funk, to see like what a tap show did for an audience, like that interaction. And that was 1995, 96. I think it was 95. then high school and college, uh, I wasn't in noise funk, but after college, kind of came back around and rejoined Savion in a company that he was running called Tie Dye, which lasted from about 2001 to 2003 ish. And then in 2005, I started my own company called Cats Paying Dues, which I started with Michelle Dorrance and Nicholas Young. And then that slowly grew and shifted and lasted for about 10, 11 years. Are there any recordings of the company? Yes. Are they public? Not yet. There's some stuff floating around YouTube, like promo videos and stuff, but we've never released any full shows. And that's, I guess, like, those are the highlights. Coming up as a young kid, I was around a lot of the old guys and ladies. Old. It's such a, I don't know how to say it politically correctly. I call them old cats. So I spent a lot of time with Jimmy Slide, Buster Brown, Henry Latang, significant time around Bunny Briggs, Mabel Lee, Tina Pratt, Brownie Brown, Leroy Myers. I know I'm forgetting people. Harold Cromer. Yeah, so there are a lot of voices and people kind of like in me.
Great. So we decided a topic for today, or you decided a topic, which was what are the top 3 things that you think that we should know about tap dance history, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we had a conversation, right? And I've traveled a bunch to teach and to perform, and there's always a question. Even like teaching teachers, there's always kind of a desire to know about the history, and there's a lot of conversation around the history, but it's like it's a challenging space, right? It's like it's not a clear thing. So I actually asked somebody asked me to do this for their audience. Like, can you put together the top 3 things that you think we need to know about tap dance history? And I said, could you tell me what you think those top 3 things are? And the 3 questions that came by were all like fact questions. Like, can you tell me where it started, who started it, like, and when it became popular, or when it became not popular, or like dates and places, right? Some things about like a person or a name. And I found that really interesting, because my journey through the history was through individual people, right? There was like a balance as I was coming up between having access to the older generation and also having books and some videos and some things to kind of, if they said a name, then I would try and find a picture with that name next to it in a book, so I knew I had a face to the name. So I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of reframe the top 3 things that you need to know about tap dance history with regards to the things that I've learned trying to deal with that history with the Tap Legacy Foundation. So, okay, so we dive in, yeah? All right. So the first thing that I think everybody needs to know about tap dance history is that it's about people. That is, and people in relationship to one another. Like there's no, I don't think there's a way to really understand the history of tap dancing unless we start reconnecting the relationships that exist in the community. And that doesn't mean that you have to have had access to an old cat. It just means you have to know who's teaching you and who their teacher was and who their teacher was, or who their inspirations were, and who, like, so you start getting this web of relationships that can give you a picture of how this craft has kind of navigated itself through time. And because people go away, there's going to be like clarity. If we walk backwards through the timeline, it's going to be like a lot of clarity in terms of recent stuff going on and the ability to make connections here. And then at some point it gets really blurry. And that's just something that we have to deal with as a community and be okay with. When it comes to people and communities and tap dancing, as if we look at tap dancing as an oral tradition, there are rules around how oral traditions function in communities, and those rules are based around this idea that oral traditions speak directly to the identity of the community. So they are governed by this statement: we do this thing, and so we are of the same people, or we are of the same people because we do this same thing. And so it works on the vertical plane, this like intergenerationally. I know that I come from these people because I do the same thing that these people used to do. And then it works horizontally, or in the same generation, to say, well, I know we're of the same people because we're all doing the same thing. And so if we're not engaged in relationship with the people and kind of learning about the people who are doing this thing, it gets really bizarre to think of tap dancing as an identifier, right? To say that we all are of the same people because we do the same thing. If you scratch a little bit of the surface, and in the tap dance community, we have people who believe a bunch of different things, like have different value sets. I think that's where we might find a lot of friction in the community, because they're both things that are happening. But if we say that the most important thing to know about tap dance history is that it is about the people, then the questions that we ask are different. We start asking not when did this start, or kind of what's the coolest step, but we start asking who are the carriers of the knowledge, who can be trusted, who was in a place when a certain thing happened, and our care for the craft work begins to extend to care for people. And that bond becomes, I think, stronger, or just strong. So I think that's the first thing. And I guess I'll lay them all out, and then we'll just open it up for questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go like one by one, kind of. I think they connect. They will like pop up like different things from different places. But
Totally.
yeah, like instead, like there's two things I was not reading. You were reading, Iselin?
Yes. So the first question was from Anna. She wonders about that you referred to tap as tap music. If you started learning, or it says, did you start learning having the mindset, or has that changed over the years?
Oh, this is a really good question. So when I auditioned for the National Tap Dance Ensemble, I was accepted under probation. And Chris took me aside at the audition. He said, "You have good feet, but you have no ear. If you promise to learn how to listen, we'll bring you in the company." And I, of course, yes, just get me in, right? Like this is the path I want to be in. Uh, and I think my journey has been a continual unfolding of this idea as like you can't you can't separate tap dance from being music because we make sound. And if you are a nerd about things like I am, like if you like to go really 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 deep into stuff, then you start talking about tone and phrasing and dynamics, and you realize like the musicians have it. They have all the language. They've done this stuff. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Um, we just have to relearn or learn how our practice works with that language and with that framework. And sometimes that might be at odds or different than other approaches, but I think it's a matter of kind of intensity and not like this only does this or this only does that. Um, does that make sense? I'm wondering.
Mm, I think
Yeah, so
that's
I didn't start thinking that way at all. Um, but I realized like there was a year where I was in the residency with Savion, learning from Chris Baker at the youth ensemble, and still in my dance studio, doing what we would we would label as more theatrical tap dancing. And the approaches for all three were different. All the same craft, right? But the approaches were completely different. And yet if you dug a little deeper, you would start to see why the approaches were different and what was common across the three. And so there's tension if I were to come and say like, yeah, these three people come from the same root, other folks might say definitely not. Uh, but I tend to, it's kind of like, well, how far back on the timeline do you want to trace to say what root somebody comes from, and then what branch they go off in, and if they make their own branch and go off in some other direction.
Yeah, maybe the worry, I think so. Like Anna was worried, like if you don't start in this mindset, you're not able to change or something like this. I feel like, yeah, just to make sure, like there's no wrong starting place.
No, not
Just
at
saying
all.
that. I
Yeah.
know. I'm just saying.
So let's talk about lineage for a second, right? If there are certain communities that you can be born into, right? And by being born into a bloodline, you are automatically accepted into that community, and like you have that identity, and it's very clear and it's very easy, right? And then there's the idea of adoption. And adoption's a little more complicated. right? Because there's no clear bloodline. You might not look the same as anybody else, and yet the thing that actually matters in that relationship, which is the love between the people who are adopting and the adopted, is what makes that relationship function. And so if we transfer that into tap dance land and we say that there's like there's an internal family that maybe you've been born into, or maybe we're trying to be adopted into, and who knows what that family is, and who knows who decides what that family is at this point, but there is this idea that that thing exists. It actually, if we believe in adoption, then it doesn't matter where we come from. It matters the relationship that we have with the craft, and that relationship fuels our pursuit. Right? If you love something, you're going to want to find out everything about it. You're going to want to be as close to it as possible. You're going to want to, like, you might not know when it was born, but you know its favorite tea. Like, there are different ways to figure that out, but you will know, and it will show up on you, that you are on that journey, that you are on that path, and that you really care about this thing, and it'll frame all your questions.
Next question on the list was from Nicole, and says that but there are also different, let's say, traditions. I mean, old cats, but also movies, Irish style contests, etc. How do they cross or not cross each other, and how is one born from the other or split?
Yeah. So there are entire fields of study, namely like ethnomusicology. There's a small, like, it's a growing field called ethnochoreology, which basically people dedicate their entire lives to answering that question. The easy way for me, or I guess not the easy way, the way that I journeyed into that was through people, which is why I think that people are the most important thing, because it's really difficult to track kind of influences of entire communities and traditions, but it's easier, and it's also potentially dangerous to do that. To broad stroke say, well, if you're from here, you do this, and if you were over here, you do this, and because this was going on, like, all these people started doing this other thing. It's a lot easier to say, this person was in a film. The other people that were in that film, we know, spent time with this person. So when they went off and started doing stuff on their own, were they affected by the time of the first film? And yes, there's the issue with film and television and kind of mass media is the scale of influence that it has. So, imagine a moment in time where there was no film and there was no television and there was no mass media per se. You would have a tap dancer, say, in New York, and in order for them to spread their message, their kind of dancing, they would literally have to travel the entire country, and that would take a long time. And so by the time they did one loop, they could come back to where they started and do exactly the same thing that they did starting the first loop again, because people would have either forgotten or they'd only have a faint memory and they'd want a refresher. There was no way for people to just get refreshed or get the thing again. And so that's a more local influence, right? Whereas mass media has mass influence. And so dancers, I think what we experience in tap dance land is this tension between, at least in the last century, in the 1900s, a tension between local and individual approaches and the ideas or the approach that was most prominent in mass media. So if you were to say the style of tap dancing that happened in movie musicals, there still would be multiple approaches based on the people. And if you were to say Irish style dancing, there still would be multiple approaches based on the local groups in the country and based on the local dancers within those groups. And so I think the clearest journey is to know your lineage and to track where you come from and where your people, like where the people who have poured into you or influenced you, where they come from and what their influences were. And we track that back until we can't track anymore. There's like the second most important thing that we should know about tap dance history is that there's always going to be variance. There's never going to be one clear written narrative to say this is exactly what happened and this is how and this is when and this is who. And it's the same with trying to like organize the entire picture of traditions and geography and all that stuff. And it's like, it's a huge work. And I think it's a valuable one to attempt that, but also to give the entire community some margin to know that there's going to be variance. Like people are not machines. In oral histories, what we find are if 10 people share their perspective on a story, you'll have like a very clear through line, but you'll have tons of variance around it, right? Which is the same. It's analogous to, you know, if we were to see Buster Brown do Laura, right? If we had recordings of him doing it tons of times, like when he used to do it before it was set on Manhattan Tap or Peggy Spina's company, you would see through lines. You would see like a lot of the same stuff, but you would also see some variance. And that would, but that it gives us flexibility. Like the goal is to have enough of a foundation to be able to build a house, right? Knowing that if the earth moves, we can move, right? We're too rigid of a structure doesn't actually hold.
Mm. We have two questions going into the history. I have one about your top 3 tap numbers you've seen, and then also one about if you have any books that you would recommend, especially.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, top 3 tap numbers. Okay. The most influential ones that I've seen. Top 3 is hard. It's like you try and put a top 3 together, and you're like, oh man, I don't know. And then 1 comes, and 2 comes, and then like 7 come.
Maybe it can be like experiences, not necessarily tap numbers. Like you said that when you watch the movie Tap, something changed for you. For instance, something like that, you know?
Oh, yeah, okay. So easy, the challenge scene in the movie Tap, like easy. I think very, very close behind are Gregory Hines' tribute to Sammy Davis Jr., where they dance together. The like watch the full 9-minute version. Don't just watch the cut one where it's just him solo. The Miller Brothers and Lois, classic clip. That clip is the reason I started my company. And then if you haven't seen, there's a clip of Black and Blue from the Tony Awards where they do a piece that's choreographed by Henry Latang. And I'm blanking on the name of the piece, but if you haven't seen that, go watch it. It is a pristine example of what like chorus line dancing, like ensemble dancing, and individual expression can be. And I think it's like 6 or 7 minutes. It's not like a short piece, right? And yeah, it's actually quite phenomenal.
Connection with that, somebody's asking if you have any like specific in mind about Tap in the golden Hollywood movies.
Yeah. I think it was a fantastic exemplification of skill and artistry. But it's built, I mean, the flip side to that coin is that it was produced strictly within the confines of an industry. So it might be a reflection of a craft that came, and this is I should be careful. In America, it's really, really difficult to track, and this goes back to the other question. It's really difficult to track the influence between the arts and culture industry and local expressions of arts and culture. Right? They're kind of like intertwined. And I mean, I remember the first time I learned that Fred Astaire would take lessons from John Bubbles. And you're like, wait, what? I don't know like what specifically you would want me to comment on, other than like there are questions that are made to start controversies, right? There are questions that are made to get people to say, well, who is the better tap dancer, right? Or I remember I'd come off gigs and people would be like, well, what do you think about Fred Astaire? And I'm like, why are you asking me that question? I think he's a great dancer. He's a great dancer. What else do you want to know? Are you asking me about appropriation? Do you want me to talk about that? Like, we can talk about that, but ask it directly, right? There's no need to kind of go around and try and like get somebody to say something that you think is controversial when it is like there is truth to the fact that in an ongoing way, whether it happens from inside the community or not, communal expressions of art are always transferred into the market. And that transference is a really sensitive thing. And who's involved in it and who then reaps the benefit of what the market can offer in terms of resources is a really important thing to deal with. But I think I don't think we need to we need to fix it. Like we don't need to fight over it. Right? Which goes back to this whole thing is about people. Right? If Fred Astaire, if I don't know Fred Astaire, I don't know anything about him. Right? So what is there to comment on what happened in those movies other than, was it good music? Yeah, it was good music. Was it solid dancing? As far as I have seen, yes. Did they have other people record the tap sounds on top of them sometimes? Yes. But that is a standard practice in Hollywood. Does that take away from the talent that the stars had? No. Were there other people as talented? Yes. All of it is true. And so to play the competition game and to say well, this person is more and this person is more, and no. The only time we get to settle as a community is if we honor talent for talent. And even then, it might not be fair. Because there are folks who exist that have this much time on this earth and this much contribution to the craft, but their influence was you can track it, you can see where it happened. So one of the things that old cats used to do when I sat with them was they would drop names. And if you're in an oral tradition, if you're talking about oral history, you name drop. It's part of the deal. One of the reasons you do that is because if you're telling a story, you're going to name drop all the other people that were in that same place. So that whoever you're telling the story to has a list of references. When they go on their next trip or when they continue their search, they're going to search for these other people. They're going to ask them, hey, I heard this story from Andrew. What's your take on this story? And there's a problem if we don't remember the names. So one of the things that we started to do a couple years ago at the Tap Legacy Foundation is just compile names. No bios, no dates, nothing, just the names. Because we figured Google's doing a great job with the search engine. Wikipedia's okay. It's not the best reference, but it's a start. But you're not gonna be able to go in or know what you're searching for unless you have a name. So that list is there. It's on the Tap Legacy website. And that will hopefully help start the searches that will compile the information that will give us the broadest view of who it is that's contributed to what it is that we do.
Cool.
Also,
let's go to this question about the books, because it's a thing. I think it's really interesting. The thing they're giving you facts, but it's for a beginner or intermediate, people that is starting in this community. It's a start, but I think it's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah. So in my journey, you will always have both, and I think it's important to have both. People and then references. And in oral histories, it's only people. Nowadays, you can have both. And the historians are people too. So you take what is written with, well, I can say it this way. If you know more about the writer, you'll understand the book better. And if you know more about how books come to life, you'll be able to navigate the book without without being taken by it. Right? A book is a reflection of some reality that actually happened. So is it all true? Is it mostly true? Does it have all the information that we need? Depends on the book, frankly. And as we know with some stories, if you take certain things out, the story changes. And every book goes through an editing process where things have to be taken out because there's only so many pages and so many words that are allowed. And that restriction on resource can actually shift what we have access to. So this is what I would recommend. In the same way that in an oral history, you don't just take one person's story, you get all the names and you get all the stories from as many people as you can. You get as many books as you can. You read as many things as you can. I got to a point where I would spend an hour or two in the bookstore in the music section looking at every biography of jazz musicians, and I would comb. I guess I don't know if that's a word. I would comb the index. Like I would flip through the index and look for names of tap dancers. And I would buy whole books just because there were like 3 or 4 lines about a tap dancer. You know, Groundhog is a tap dancer that Underground Cat, like very few people know about him. I don't even remember right now his real name. But he is mentioned both in Marshall Stern's book, Jazz Dance, and in the biography of Little Jimmy Scott, the jazz singer. And if I remember correctly, in Marshall Stern's book, he's given thank you, skim and comb. Yes, I knew that was a word. So to go back to Groundhog, in Marshall Stern's book, Marshall describes Groundhog as like a particular personality, and in Little Jimmy Scott's book, he's described differently. And it's really, so that becomes really interesting. You're like, okay, well, here are 2 authors. They both had interactions with this dancer and both have varying perspectives. So so we need a third person, right? We need to find a third cat who found this dancer, or who interacted with this dancer, who came up with this dancer, to like tell us, well, what was he like? Google Books is amazing because you can search through books, all the time, without having to go and buy them. But the way that we read is important, right? It's not just reading all the stuff. It's saying, what am I trying to learn from reading this? Am I trying to learn like the narrative that this author wants me to know, or am I trying to fill in gaps of the questions that I already have because I'm in this practice? And if reading this helps, great. And if it doesn't seem to resonate with what the reality of the situation is, maybe we just keep it in our back pocket and we say, well, this is what this cat is saying.
Then the answer is like, get all of them. Get all of them.
Yeah.
Just find
There's
them.
there's a wonderful quote by Walt Whitman. It's like, listen to everything and discard what disturbs your soul. Like this idea that get all the information, like everything that's out there, just go ahead and get it. You will find the things that ring true as you continually unearth what is true about this craft. Like, people have been hitting the floor with their feet for centuries. It's not new. Right? But this particular craft of tap dancing has a particular history around it that kind of pressed people into hitting the floor with their feet in this particular way. And if you're curious about that and kind of how all the stuff around it has brought up the craft that we say we're doing today, you have to read everything. And the closer you can get to the actual practitioners and their experience of the world around them, the better. Right? One of the best books that I read wasn't even a tap dance book. It was called Notes and Tones. It was musician to musician interviews. So it was a jazz drummer who had the same set of questions and interviewed like 30 people. And you have like sidemen and folks I'd never heard of in the jazz world. And then you have like Dizzy Gillespie in the same book. And the questions were not like, where do you think jazz came from? The questions were, what are your feelings about the word jazz? Because the word jazz has a history that is not necessarily honoring of people's expression of music. Right? So these musicians who feel like their music was named by an outsider had very particular opinions about that word. And it's interesting to walk through that because, and this was done in the 60s. So that time and space in America was also very specific and had a particular energy around it. And so the more we understand of like what was going on in the world that during which these specific people were doing this craft, we'll get to learn more about the craft and we'll get to learn more about how the craft actually functions. Right? If like in an interview, the more somebody learns about my parents, where they come from, why my life is the way it is, the more they're going to understand about why I dance the way I dance and what I think is, and why I think certain things are important and certain things aren't when it comes to dancing. And that's the actual craft work. Like if we say we want to learn how to tap dance is not just the technique. It's making choices about what you think is important and what you think isn't. Because we don't have all the time in the world to do everything that we think is important. Everybody's making choices. Tell you what, I will post the book list. Yeah, so Estefanía knows this. Oh, and Robin, do you know the book? I know you got my back. Yeah, okay, so knows the book. Awesome. That's great.
Perfect.
Great. Yeah, the list.
We had a follow-up question about the Golden Hollywood area, and that was, what function of tap dance you find in them most often or most memorable? Strict entertainment, tool for telling a story, or underlying emotions, or something else?
So I think I can tell you the one that I most enjoy. Um, I've practiced all of it at some point in my journey. Um, I This is hard. Um, I think the ones that I've gravitated to the most are right now tap dance as a meditative practice and um, tap dance as a vehicle uh, for actual community. So for learning, for human expression, uh, for relationship. Entertainment, storytelling, like all those things are wonderful, and they even even tap dance as strictly a vehicle to show that people are good at something, like exists, right? Um, I think where I find myself in my life right now and where and how I see the world, like we need more practices that bring people together and that settle people in their own self. So that's kind of where I've landed on it. Um, yeah, and that's not to say that any of the other practices don't have their purpose or their value, but it's just different. And it frames, I guess, just to double down, it frames the approach, right? If you are more drawn to tap dance as entertainment or tap dance as, we could say, sharing joy with an audience, um, or tap dance as a way to allow an audience to escape the realities of life. Those are other ways to frame entertainment. Uh, then the skills that you practice in tap dance land are going to be different than if you're drawn to tap dance as a meditative practice. You'll still have to deal with breath control. You'll still have to deal with stamina. You'll still have to deal with technique and clarity of thought and rhythmic and tonal and physical accuracy. Like all the skill sets will be there. But which ones you focus on and to what end are going to be very, very different. So if you are a student learning now, that might be a good question to ask your teacher. Right? Where are they, or what's their focus in terms of their craft work, or how did they learn it? What was their teacher's focus? So that at least you have a frame to say, man, I'm learning all these traditional time steps. Like, why? Or my teacher is like letting me improvise so much. I don't like, I want content, but why is this a thing? Right? There are reasons for those choices, and it's not just because it's the right way to tap dance. Right? They're more specific pursuits that I think can add clarity.
Cool. I think you said the word that is like really nice to me. Like you talk about relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I think like it's a good topic because we're talking like it's about people, it's about these relationships. Most of the people here, they have connection with the teacher and how to do the other connections.
Mm-hmm.
I think like it's a frame to talk about.
Yeah, I think so. When I started teaching at Broadway Dance Center, it was 2001. I was 21. I just graduated from college. And over the next few years, as I was teaching there, I started having this habit of like trying to force people to ask questions. Because for whatever reason, in classes in that studio, the folks that I was attracting at least, they didn't want to ask questions. And I'm like, any question. I started joking. It's like, I give you the first person to ask a question, they get $1. Like, just ask the question. Um, because I learned to be very diligent around counting when I was a teacher, not before. Because students were asking me, hey, can you count this? I'm like, I don't know. We're going to try. I would not recommend that to be the process that you go through, but to say that it is the curiosity of the student that forces the teacher to continue to learn and to continue to keep their knowledge fresh. If nobody's asking, like, nobody's going to care. So then stuff starts to disappear. Jimmy Slide, in his later years, took on a mentee, a very specific individual that he poured all his teaching theory and content into. That person's name is Rocky Mendez, and he's still around. He's in the States. And when I would talk to Slide about like that process, like how is he doing, he would say it's really nice to be reminded or to have a situation where I have to remind myself of the things that I used to know. And so there are a lot of things that would come up for him that he showed Rocky uh, that, you know, were kind of like in the back of his mind that he hadn't had to deal with for years, but that he, you know, they were around and they were a part of him and his process. But when he had a person, when he had like a place to put the stuff that he knew would be cared for, uh, all the stuff started coming back up. And so it's very much like, you know, you see people who are in caring and loving relationships, they say like, you know, you kind of like, you have this shot of life, like something happens where you're like, colors are a little brighter and the day like is a little more fun. And even if stuff is challenging, there's like a different kind of energy because you know that there's like you are valued, you are known, you are going to be cared for, even if stuff is hard. And I think for those who have dedicated a chunk of their life to a particular craft, they want to know that what they've dedicated their life to is going to be cared for and is going to be protected, because they've had a life experience that they know not to trust everybody. They've learned not to trust everybody. So they so the relationship becomes the key, and the it is the teacher's prerogative to say, no, I'm not going to answer that one yet. But I think it's the student's responsibility to poke at the teacher and to say, why are we doing this? Where does this come from? What is the reference? Why are you thinking about this today? Like, all those questions I think become really important.
This regarding what you're saying right now, me and Estefanía, we talked a bit earlier. Like, maybe you have some more tips about how students today, and especially like now that we're in kind of a lockdown situation, to filter out what is just fast food and still see these relations, so you're uh, not just going and learning whatever on YouTube per se just because it's there, but that you actually can find the context of what maybe you've been working with your teacher before, um, what, for instance, happens if you start taking all this material without any context.
Yeah. So there's a thing called signal to noise ratio in statistics and in academics. What you're looking for is more signal and less noise, because the field now, it is going to be very, very difficult for someone who's coming into the scene, into the field, into all the stuff, especially someone new, to be able to know for themselves what's signal and what's noise, right? What is good information and what's fast food, what's healthy and what's gonna pass through, right? It's just, you can learn it, it's just not gonna stick and stay because it's not meant for that. I think the thing that is most important is to remember why you were attracted in the first place and to chase that signal. That little tiny spark of a thing that we're given to inspire us to do a thing that's crazy and not common, is a gift. And that's normally the first thing that we forget and that gets buried under all this other stuff. But I've found that to be the entire through line of my journey. Goes back to two things. It goes back to a simplicity of wanting to dance, which is 3-year-old me, and the communal joy that was in the challenge scene in the movie Tap. And so those two things I keep finding myself going back to over and over and over again. And my dancing gets better, but only because I want it to be really simple for me to just get up and dance and not be like this thing where, oh, I don't know how to do that. So like there's a no, it's like I know how to do that. Let's go. And I want to be able to play with people. And the more you know, and the more Jimmy Slide used to say, the better time you have, the better time you'll have. Like the more you know about how to tap dance, the more you can play with other people. Like the more you know about music, the more you can play with musicians. And that will, and if your goal is to play with people, then you're going to want to get better. And you're going to want to chase the things that will get you better for that thing.
Great. There's a question from Anna here, which I think is great. She says, this is maybe a more of an intense question, but I find in tap dance at least that it is relatively easy to find and feel a connection with teachers and history. However, I find it hard to find a connection with myself. Do you think that connection is built with the years, or is it more about hard work, searching and diving into tap in a more intellectual way?
Whoa.
Great
I
question.
know her as my student. That's the thing. That's great.
Are you, so when you're talking about a connection with yourself, what are you talking about? We could go down this rabbit hole. I have no problem going down this rabbit hole, but we have to be clear. Are you talking about a physical comfort with the dancing and feeling like you're at home while you do the thing, or are you talking about like a connection with your body in general, or are you talking about like a more spiritual experience, in which case we have to start talking about God and that idea, or whatever spiritual tradition you're coming from?
About what I want to tell to other people, Anna says.
Okay. So we're talking about like and how to experiment with yourself. Okay. Every tap dancer I know goes through a cycle where, you know, at first they're learning from their teacher. Everything feels new. It's very, very bizarre. And then the content begins to settle. And then the approach begins to settle. And then we're able to imitate people. And that begins to settle. The imitation of others begins to settle. And then we're drawn to a period of time where we're alone. And you might still see us in public, but most of our practice is alone. And most of our thought life, like the stuff that we're thinking about, is alone. And it's during that time that all the other voices that we've kind of been accumulating start to go back. And the voice that you're given starts to try to show up. And that is a journey. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a today I have found my voice and I will go out into the world and start giving talks and all that. It doesn't really work that way. The alone time is really, really scary, because more often than not, the student has been around really good teachers. And so we have really high standards, and everything that our voice comes up with is like not as good as the stuff that we've been around. And so I think it's a journey of trust. It's a journey of trusting your choices inside this craft, inside this practice, enough that if you go out for a shuffle, the shuffle that you want is going to be there. Because you've spent the time, you know where that shuffle is, you know where it lives, and you know how to get to its house really quickly. And you even know when it's home. You know when it's out working and you're not going to find it, and you know when it's home. And so the experimentation becomes calling that shuffle really late at night and seeing if it's willing to answer your phone call. Right? And can you share an intimate detail with that shuffle without that shuffle running away? And it literally is a relationship of trust that you can experiment and you can see where all your shuffles are. And you can begin to ask, I would ask the question, what is the most important thing on my heart that I feel I'm supposed to share with people? And that might change over time, but that question should get you to the story that you are meant to tell other people. It's the one that's most important to you. I don't think there is the only caveat to that, the only check that I have to that question is whatever story that for me that I need to tell should be one that doesn't hurt people, that isn't destructive, right? Even if it can be a challenging story, it can be one that's hard to hear, but it shouldn't be hurtful. And that's me.
Great. Courtney has a different question. She says, what ways have you found to continue that communal exchange while under lockdown?
That's a good question. When lockdown happened, I have a list of friends, like a short list, and then a longer list. And knowing that dancing wasn't going to be thinking that dancing wasn't going to be like the chunk of my day that it had been, I just sent a quick note to everybody on my friend list. It was like checking in, and that was it. And so communal exchange for me at this point doesn't necessarily have to happen through dancing. Like, dancing is a vehicle. It is a thing we can use to get us to relationship, or to experience a particular kind of relationship, right? There's a community of people, an indigenous tribe in the Philippines, in Mindanao. A dear friend of mine, a cellist, Dave Egar, has done work with them, and I was involved in one of the projects that they brought to the States. They have a rule that before any negotiation with any outside party, so any conversation with any visitor that comes in, particularly if there's a disagreement and an agreement needs to happen, everybody involved has to play music together before anybody talks. And you're like, okay, well, what if I don't know how to play music? Or what if I don't know what kind of music we're playing? They're like, no, 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 no. Everybody sits, everybody plays. And so I think there's both sides to it, right? Like if you're coming into a thing or into a relationship, dancing can be a vehicle to make that relationship stronger. Like it can do a thing for that relationship. But then on the flip side, dancing can be an expression of what the relationship already is. So I can tell you, like, when I see friends of mine that I have a dancing relationship with, um, the thing I want to do most is like sit down and have a conversation because I just want to check in with them, and then I want to go dance. Um, or we'll do it like vice versa, right? Where you haven't seen somebody for a long time, and the first thing that you do is you throw a step down, and they throw a step down, and then you dance together for a little bit. Um, yeah, and sometimes you're able to learn more about where somebody is when you dance with them than by sitting down and having a conversation. So I've actually found the lockdown to be really cool in terms of having deeper conversations than um, if the relationship is only an exchange of skill or technique or practice. But I am looking forward to a time where we can get in the same room and just dance a little.
Yes, I think we all are.
Yeah, yeah, it's a thing. Um, it's a thing, and I think there have been a number of projects that I've been involved in over the past couple of weeks. One is Stuck at Home Records, which is an amazing thing that a friend of mine, Isamu McGregor, pianist, started when the lockdown started. And basically the project is he has a ton of musician friends. Every week he makes a bunch of different bands, and the bands make a 1-minute track every week. And so every week you're in a new band, and every week you're making new music, and you're meeting new people. And I've played with like 6 weeks, 3 times 18 different musicians in the past 6 weeks, none of whom I met in real life, and none of whom I've ever known before this project. And yet we're making music and things are happening, and like I feel like I'm a part of a whole new community of people. Um, and it's super quick and it's super fun. And you're like, wow, okay, that was easy. And there's yeah, and it just feels good. So
Yeah,
that's one thing that I think in terms of communal exchange.
Yeah, I think this lockdown is encouraging people to find creative ways without having to actually limit yourself into a physical place. So you see many different type of projects, and as you say, these kind of project that goes across borders, across people that you haven't met before, and different influences than maybe what you used to. So I think
Well,
it's
and the thing is, like, again, this goes back to everything being about people. Like, I met Isamu in New York. He was referred to me by another pianist for a gig that I was trying to work on, a project that I was working on that needed like a particular kind of player. And he came in and he was super chill and like really good listener in terms of like playing. Um, and so there was a quality about his person that resonated with me, and I think it flipped. So like the next time he called me for a project, and I was like, that's a big deal because musicians don't often do that. It happens, but it's not often. And then we've become friends over time. Like he's moved and I've moved, and like our lives have shifted. But when he popped this project off, I just dropped him a note and I was like, hey man, how can I be a part of this? Because this is super cool. And he was like, yes, please. And we're off to the races, right? So there are things that I think it takes a lot to bring people together when the culture that we have is designed to pull people apart, right? Globally, very generally speaking, the market culture is designed for individualization. Like, just you get to make your playlist of music, and that's how this product serves you the best and gives you an individual. It's like individual attention, right? And so if everybody has a bunch of people giving them individual attention, right? What's the benefit of trying to get a group of people together to do a common thing? Right? Culturally speaking, like those two things are kind of at odds. And so it's going to take time and effort to like get the people together and frame the common pursuit and like make the thing happen. Especially if you're hoping for that gathering to be something that lasts and not just a one-off that goes, this was amazing, and then we're all off to our own lives again. That happens quite a bit and is cool, but it's just a different end.
We have a new question. Let's see. Following a topic we talked about during one of classes with their grant, what do you think about naming the steps and combos labels versus singing?
I don't. So I think there are a couple things. Uh, Communities form because of common language. So I think it's important to have some common language uh, within the tap dance community. Otherwise, we don't have a community. It just doesn't exist. Um, I think there is, and I was actually writing about this the other day. There is the potential for uh, manipulation and oppression and kind of like all the things that are hurtful inside the act of naming and inside the act of um, using language to label a particular thing. Uh, there was an organist in Harlem. His name was Jimmy Robbins. His nickname was Preacher. He used to play at a club called Showman's a lot. Showman's was the unofficial clubhouse of the Copacetics. And when I was coming up, this is like late 90s, Showman's used to host a tap jam. And so I used to go to Showman's a ton. And Jimmy Robbins told me once, he said, if you name it, you can claim it. And I was like, that's a very street smart thing to say. So he had experienced in his life the idea that a thing exists, right? We do a step. There's somebody else in this world who might have done exactly the same step. If you come to market with that step and that step has a name, and you say that this is the name of this step, in the market, that step is now yours. Right? Regardless of whoever else might have kind of happened upon that combination of movements and sounds prior or after. Right? And so for me, I think there's a lot of sensitivity that I try and take around making sure basics in tap dance land are named. Right? The fundamental things that we use to build up all the stuff that we do, those are named. We know what those are. Everybody knows what those are. It's the same. Should be the same across the board, as much as possible. But beyond those things, I start using the language of, well, this is traditionally called, or you might hear this called, and just name all the names. Because the language of tap dance vocabulary has never been globally codified. It's been locally codified in a number of geographies, and depending on the people, certain vocabulary has been codified in certain institutions, but those institutions were built up by people from certain geographies and certain pursuits. So you should be able to tell where somebody's from depending on what language they use. Right? And it's, the big one is always paddle and roll versus power diddle. Like, that's a huge vocabulary question. And that stuff exists. You trace where the person learned from, and you will find out why they're using that language. With regards to like naming stuff versus singing, both and. Any person who's doing anything in tap dance land should be able to sing what they're doing and should be able to say what it is that they're doing. Right? And there are a couple of other things that you should be able to do with regards to a step to say that you actually know what's going on in that step. But I don't think it's like a either or. I think it's like all the things, because it's all information. So long as it's not used to claim the thing as a right, then yeah, use the vocabulary. It's how we understand what we're doing, or it's one way.
Great.
I think Estefanía has to
Wow.
translate the next question.
We have a Spanish question. ¿Qué es lo más difícil para empezar a entender la línea del tap en el cuerpo? Okay. What you're saying, like, is the most difficult part to understand the line of tap? I don't know what it means, line of tap on the body.
As is
I think the shape, like the shapes. I don't know.
the shape.
Like, what you mean about, like, ¿qué quieres decir con línea del tap? I don't know if she's answering.
Is she talking about line in the same way that like other forms have particular lines or particular shapes that the body has to make?
I think so. I think it's related to that. I'll think of that.
Okay.
Maybe the style, or I don't want to say style, but
Yeah, well, so tap dancing, we know tap dancing lives in this tension between trying to create the sounds that we want to make and what those movements make in terms of pictures. And then you have this kind of cycle or like continual combination of things. And because tap dancing is performative, when you put it on a stage, everybody's watching you, so you have to do something for their eyes. Any choice that you make is a choice with regards to both what it is that you're going to sound like and what it is that you're going to look like. So again, if you spend a bunch of time in the book of Jimmy Slide, your body's going to look and move a certain way. If you put that book away and you pick up the book of Steve Condo's, your body's going to look and move a different way. And so I think there are two specific approaches that I've noticed that are the most intention, and that is there's one approach to dance that is performative, where it's kind of pose based. It's like I'm going to hit this picture, and then the next thing that I know as a marker is this picture, and then I go to the next thing, and that's that picture. And the opposite approach, or the other approach, I don't know if it's opposite, but the other approach is a more cyclical or fluid approach, where it's I'm moving through this idea and then getting to this idea and then moving through that idea. And there's never a real stop. And the way this shows up in our body is that the approach that's more pose based has a more rigid spine and a more rigid neck in the body. And the approach that's more fluid literally has a more fluid spine, or can at least. And I think the difficulty is that we live in cultures that to varying degrees have lost the organic nature of dancing. Things are very pose oriented, like they're very official. And to try and get back to a place where the spine can have some fluidity and then the neck can be loose is just really important. Examples. I don't have specific ones. This is what I would recommend. You can look at any dance clip and look at the dance clip with regards to trying to find tension. If you find tension, then that's a place in the body that is not released. It's not relaxed. And there's a difference between engagement and tension. Right? Engagement is the body holding itself up and doing what it needs to execute a particular thing. And tension is like the body not being able to do the thing and move it out. Name them. It happens everywhere. Right? Pose-based dancing happens most often in the theater, but it's not always tense. Right? And organic dancing happens most often in the public square. But you can find people who are not relaxed, who are not released in that. And so just because someone someone says they're doing a particular style of dance doesn't mean that that makes it a thing. It's what's actually happening in the body. And so there's a lot of tap dancing that goes on that's like, quote unquote, really, really good, and it's super tense. Right? And there's a lot of tap dancing that goes on that's super released and might not be clear, or might not be up to, like, technically speaking, up to the place where it needs to be to hit the standard of where the craft is today. And so we're living in this like weird tension that, no, you can do both. You should be able to have a safe, healthy, organic approach to this craft that is technically proficient and does not ultimately injure your body.
Do you think
Right?
that in this perspective that other types of dance training will influence you in a good way for this, or do you don't think at the end of the day it might not matter?
I think other kinds of movement training will influence you in either good or bad ways. Right? I don't think it's dance only. Gregory Hines was, like, by all accounts, a fairly good martial artist. And martial arts are movement training. Right? All muscle memory will inform what it is that your body does. So my question, one of the questions that I carry and I hold, has always been, if tap dancing wasn't influenced by the other dances that surrounded it, after like its inception, what would it move like? Right? If and I grew up being a very shy, like, non-social dancer. Like, you throw me at a party, I'm on the wall. Like, I will walk from the wall to where the food and the snacks are, and then back to the wall, and then back to the food, and then back to the wall. So my body never really had muscle memory for social dances. So when I came to tap dance, it was like, this is the most that my body's going to move. So I wonder, in light of this approach to movement, what are the things that are going to come out? And so I think we, if we have other movement practices, we just need to be aware of them and aware of their influence inside of this tradition.
Yeah, it's great. So
Yeah, let's say, like, we talk about like the two first things.
Oh, there's the third one.
There's a third one. Maybe it's
There's
time to drop it.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay, so we gotta end with this. That's great.
Maybe we need to name them again, because there's new people coming in all the time.
Yeah. So the top three things that you need to know about tap dancing are: first two we've talked about, this one we're going to talk about now. First one is, everything is about people. The more we know who, and the more we know about the who, the more we'll understand the craft that we're involved in. And the more we know about how people have navigated relationship and the establishment of trust and kind of the value of knowledge inside communities of old, like in older ways of doing that, the more we'll understand kind of the questions that are around the tap dance community and the questions that come up in tap dance history. The second thing is everything in tap dance history will have variants. We're fundamentally dealing with an oral tradition, which is an oral history, which means dealing with people, and people are not machines. So you're going to be looking for the thickest through line, like the through line that has the most voices, that has the most people saying the same thing. And then the stuff that's around it is the variance or the ornamentation where, you know, one person might remember this particular detail from this particular event, but everybody else is saying everything else the same. Right? And so that little detail is something that you hold on to as an extra, but it's not part of the larger narrative, right? And the last thing, which is, it's just a thing, is that some things will be lost forever. There are some things in tap dance history that we will never know, and that we will never be able to fully know. And that is okay. In oral histories, there is a continual communal memory loss that happens. Communities don't remember everything about their history. They remember the things that are most important. And so long as the community is remembering the things that are most important, then we'll be okay. And the things that are lost are okay. I think the challenge comes when we maybe, depending on your generation or depending on where you are, like your perspective of the community, you might start seeing a shift in what the community is deeming important, like what we're spending our time on, what we're remembering, what we're talking about. And that's a signal that the values of the community are shifting. And some people might respond to that with work, like, no, I think we need to like pull the values back. Some people might respond with the fight, like, we shouldn't be doing this. What are we doing? Blah, blah, blah. Right. And some people might respond with apathy, like, okay, well, I guess this is what it is now. And they just move. It's important for any of us who are pursuing the craft to just know that the stuff that we remember and the stuff that we spend our time to remember are the stuff that should be the most important. And you will find in a community of people who have varying interests within the same craft, you'll find the person who's like, dates are important. You know, my mom remembers everybody's birthday. She's one of those people that like, dates are important. I am not that kind of person. I'm like, you are important. When you were born, not important to me. Right? And you need both kinds of people in a community, right? For the communal memory to be solid. The dates are important, but the people are also important. Who John Bubbles was is as important as like the step that he did or the roles that he played or what movie he was in when, right? Or when he was born or when he passed away. Like, all of it is important. No single individual can remember all that stuff. And it becomes detrimental, it is bad for the building of a community, like the establishment of multiple relationships that interlock this thing, for everyone to say, oh, it's just written down over there, we got it, no problem. Then everybody forgets and they just go look it up. And that's not the way oral traditions function. Oral traditions function by continually putting people in relationship to each other and asking questions and saying, hey, I just heard this from this person. Did you know about that? Like, that's an amazing conversation starter. Because if I didn't know about that story, I'm like, well, who did you hear it from? And where did they hear it from? Right? And those conversations build relationship and begin to build trust. Because if you're like, I actually don't know where they heard it from, let me go back and ask them, you're going to go back and ask them. And you're going to come back to your newfound friend who was questioning you and say, hey, I just found out they heard it from this place. And then we start as a community to surface the sources and to surface the things that we are relying upon to tell us what it is that we're doing and who it is that we are as a community of people in this practice. And I'll share this quick anecdote, and then maybe I guess we can leave on this or wrap on this. Gregory Hines passed away in 2003, August 9th, 2003. Yeah. The first thing that I remembering from that day, and the thing that got me every other day after, was how many questions I would have liked to have asked him before he passed away. And there is this thing that happens when we love someone and we're in relationship with them, and there's a feeling of consistency. Like, they'll always be there. You can call me anytime and just send me an email and I'll get back to you and it's gonna be all good. And then there happens this thing that is life, that they're gone. And everything that they experienced and all the stuff that they learned and all the stuff that's to say nothing about like their presence and just how they make you feel, but the stuff that they would be the one that you would want to share with as life moves on, isn't there anymore. And so I would just encourage everyone to show up, like, with their people. Doesn't matter how old, young, whatever. Like, just be there, because you don't know what conversation would come up. And if you have questions for them, like, really be purposeful in asking those questions. Don't just wait for a problem to come up that you need advice to go and like ask the question. Just ask the question, because there's learning to be had all over the place, and there's experiences that I think people want to share, but want to know that that sharing is going to be cared for. Right? And we want to do that before that stuff is gone, for sure. That's a really high note, isn't it? Like, that's a ta-da.
Yes.
I think like we can start like a topic from here, like how the things were shared and how the things they're sharing like right now, because we have this social media,
Yeah.
and coming from a narrow sharing to this thing, and how you engage to the stories or the facts or all the things you need to know through all this thing.
Mm.
And
So
we were talking about
yeah,
religion.
there's a trend. Um, there's a trend now to think locally again. Um, even as people are like, we're all in this together and everybody's going through the same thing. Like the three of us, our experience of this lockdown is very different, right? So even in there is some commonness happening, but if you go down to a more local view, it's really, really different. And it's different based on geography and based on individuals and based on a huge number of things. Um, and it's really important, I think, to start local and to think of yourself as a local practitioner that is engaged in a local thing. Um, it's one of the reasons that I took the work in Vancouver, is to have that ongoing experience and to be involved in a local community. Um, but it has always been my journey, and that basically means you start with the stuff that interests you. You start with the stuff that you feel drawn to. You don't start with everything. You start with the one book that you want to start from. And then the question that comes up as you read that book is the next thing that you need to answer. And then you go to the next place that's going to answer that question. And so if tap dance history or the craft work or like the whole thing is this big pie, you're going to start here, one point. And you might jump over here and you might like spread out from over here and get like a little denser knowledge in this area. Nobody's got the whole thing. There are people whose experiences have been able to summarize a large chunk of this. And they've maybe through their work, they've actually been able to expand or like shift the perspective of the whole thing. I'm thinking of folks like a Gregory Hines, or more specifically like Savion Glover, right? But I don't think anybody who's practicing today can say we have the whole thing. And that might be an unpopular statement to say, but I think if we're going to look at ourselves as an actual community, then there's no one person who claims ownership of the community, right? We all trust what each other is carrying, and we all share what we're carrying for the benefit of, like, across those trusted relationships, for the benefit of one another. And that's why it gets dicey, it gets really sketchy for someone to go out of that model and, you know, learn something over here and then show up again and be like, hey, I learned all this stuff. And everybody's like, oh, I'm sorry, where did you learn that from? Where meaning who? Right? And somebody says, well, I learned it on my own. And you're like, wait a second. You know, was that you learned it on your own by watching someone or by watching something, or you actually were in a room alone with no influences and your body just decided to do this thing? Right? So it's the protected sharing is for the establishment of trust. And trust is a very personal thing. And so there are going to be times where people feel like on the outside of those relationships, and there's some times where they're going to feel on the inside of those relationships. But ultimately, it's the relationships that matter.
I think
I think.
that, yeah, I think there's a lot of things we could go into about what you just said too, but we've been talking about these things for 2 hours now, and I think people have a lot of information, and for this session, it might be enough to just, use some time to get all of these great things that you've been talking about today into our system,
Super
because
dense.
I think everybody who listened to this conversation got at least these many things to take with them, and hopefully people that have been listening and have been asking questions appreciate this. We highly appreciate that you took the time to come in and open up about these things.
My
That's
pleasure.
amazing. And I don't know, Estefanía, you want to say something?
I think people from now on, like, a lot of questions will pop up just for this.
Well, let's say this. Ask the people if they want us to do this again. And if they do, we'll figure out a time to do this again.
Yes, that
Yeah.
sounds like a yes.
I think like more after thinking they will come up, like maybe the things like we were talking before. Like I had like many talks with Iselin, like we were like boom like this, and I think people will arrive there too.
Yeah,
and for sure.
And yeah, there is that process, right?
Yeah.
It takes in
Once
all
you
the
start,
like a question that comes up. So like, I got my journal, right? Like, write the questions down, and if this becomes kind of a regular like toss questions time, then we can do that. That could be fun.
that would be really fun. And the answers are like yes, 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 yes. Okay.
I bet that all of these questions, people are going to go to bed and all of these things are going to circle in the head and they wake up
Right.
and, oh my God, write it down.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't go
I
to
woke
sleep.
up at 4. One day I woke up at 4, like, yeah, no, wait.
Oh my
I
gosh.
wrote everything and went to sleep again. But I pray that people will experience that thing too. It was great.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
I think we will just say thank you to everybody, and especially thank you to Andrew. This is lovely, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Yeah.
So,
Sounds
signing
good.
off. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Ciao.